Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that still makes my chest tighten every time I think about it. You probably won't survive this story without feeling a sting somewhere deep inside, especially if you've ever sacrificed everything for someone who later made you feel unwanted. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It started on a Sunday evening, the kind of lazy, peaceful night that usually smells like warm food and quiet contentment. The roast chicken was golden, the candles flickered on the table, and my son Ethan sat across from me scrolling through his phone instead of eating. I thought he was distracted by work again. But when I asked him to pass the salt, he sighed and muttered, "Mom, do you ever think maybe you're kind of a burden? Sometimes." I froze mid-reach. The word burden hit me like a slap, even though he said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. For a few seconds, I just stared at him, wondering if he was joking, but his face stayed serious, his tone distant, like a stranger's. There's this fact people rarely talk about in many modern families, especially in America. Older parents move in with their children to save money or stay close, but emotional roles shift in uncomfortable ways. Suddenly, the ones who once gave become the ones needing, and society loves to romanticize family togetherness, but quietly judges dependency. Ethan was 35, successful on paper, always in control. Me, I was the retired nurse who'd sold her own house after my husband died and moved in to help with the kids. But lately, I'd noticed my groceries replaced with cheaper brands, my laundry done less often, and my son's patience thinning like worn fabric. That night, the air in the dining room thickened. I tried to smile to laugh it off. "A burden, Ethan." "That's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" He didn't answer, just kept scrolling, mumbling something about bills, mortgage stress, then louder. "You wouldn't understand, Mom. You don't pay for any of this." That's when it sank in. He wasn't just tired, he was angry. Angry at me. I wanted to tell him I paid with decades of night shifts and aching bones, that every tile in this house was bought with my sweat and his father's sacrifices. But instead, I said nothing. Silence can be its own kind of violence. I watched the candle burn low and thought of a statistic I'd once read: over 60% of adult children report feeling financially burdened by caring for aging parents, even when those parents contribute. People still debate whether that's selfishness or just survival. Maybe it's both. Ethan stood up, grabbed his plate, and walked away, leaving me alone with the soft hum of the refrigerator and a knot forming behind my eyes. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood. I lay there thinking about the years I spent holding him, when he had nightmares, patching up his scraped knees, sending him off to college with money I didn't really have. I'd been proud of him, my brilliant son, my miracle. Now I wondered if I'd raised him too gently. Maybe I'd made him believe that love was endless credit, always available interest-free. I went into the kitchen for water and saw his work bag open on the counter. Receipts spilled out, coffee shops, repairs, and something strange, a printed notice from a loan agency with his name on it. My stomach clenched. Debt. No, it couldn't be. Ethan always bragged about being financially disciplined, but there it was at ink past due. I folded the paper quietly and slipped it back. I told myself not to overreact. Maybe it was a mix-up. Still, it haunted me. Funny thing about family, you can live under the same roof and still have no idea what storm is brewing 2 doors down. By morning, he acted normal again, cheerful, even as if last night's words had vanished. I made pancakes. He complimented the smell but didn't eat much. Then he rushed out, leaving his mug half full and his phone buzzing with notifications. I caught one glimpse before it locked again. Final reminder payment required. I cleaned the kitchen slowly, trying to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But inside me, something shifted. For years, I'd believed that parents existed to absorb their children's pain. Now I wondered, when that pain turns into blame, who absorbs yours? As I washed the last dish, I whispered something my mother used to say when I was a girl: truth hides in the quiet corners. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet corner would soon scream louder than anything my son had ever said. The next morning, the house felt too clean, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I made my usual cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the world move on as if nothing had happened. Ethan had already left for work, and my daughter-in-law, Melissa, was upstairs getting the kids ready for school. The smell of toast drifted down the hallway, mixing with the faint echo of children's laughter. For a moment, I almost believed everything was fine, but it wasn't. Something in me had cracked, invisible but deep. You can forgive an outburst, but not the truth that slips out behind it. When you live long enough, you start to understand that words aren't accidents, they're confessions disguised as irritation. And that word burden kept repeating in my head like a mosquito I couldn't swat away. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe I was in the way. Or maybe he'd simply reached that cruel age where children start measuring love in dollars and time. People still debate whether financial pressure or emotional distance kills families faster. I think it's both working together like rust and rain. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The missing coffee spoons, the grocery receipts hidden in drawers, the way Melissa's smiles seemed thinner, polite but strained. One evening, I overheard her on the phone whispering, "We can't keep covering for him." My pulse spiked, but I didn't dare ask. Families operate on unspoken agreements, one of them being, don't ask questions you're not ready to face the answers to. A strange thing happened that week. I began spending more time in the empty rooms of the house. The guest room, the old playroom, even the attic. It's funny how a house can hold the ghost of laughter. I could almost hear my husband's chuckle echoing in the walls. He would have known what to do. He always did. He'd tell me to keep calm, to observe. Truth reveals itself like mold honey, he used to say. You don't have to search for it, it'll spread until you can't ignore it. I laughed softly at the memory, but the laugh came out broken. There's a fact about modern families I once read in a psychology article: when adult children begin to see their parents as liabilities rather than mentors, the emotional dynamic reverses. Instead of gratitude, there's quiet resentment. Instead of guidance, there's tolerance. And tolerance, when stretched long enough, feels exactly like pity. I started feeling that from Ethan, his tone, his sighs, his forced patience, when I forgot something small. It's okay. Mom sounded less like comfort and more like dismissal. That night, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I opened the photo album I kept under my bed. The first picture was of Ethan at 5 years old, front teeth, missing frosting on his nose, holding a toy truck like it was treasure. I whispered to the photo, "What happened to you, baby?" And for the first time, I realized maybe I wasn't just angry at him. Maybe I was grieving him, the version of him that used to run to me for safety, not away from me for space. When Melissa came to check on me later, she looked tired too. She sat at the edge of the bed, smoothing her skirt, eyes darting everywhere except my face. "Rough week, huh?" she said. I nodded. Then she sighed and whispered, "He's been under a lot of pressure lately. Please don't take it personally." But her tone betrayed her. She was pleading with me to let it go, not for my sake, but for theirs. I smiled politely, even joked, if pressure makes diamonds, he'll shine soon enough. She chuckled softly, relieved by the humor, not realizing that humor is my camouflage. 3 jokes per 1,000 words, right? Keeps the tears at bay. After she left, I turned off the light and sat in the dark, listening to the wind outside. I wondered when love turns into debt, emotional or otherwise. Maybe every family keeps a hidden ledger, favors owed, sacrifices, forgotten disappointments stored, and maybe that's why we keep smiling to pretend the numbers still balance. The next morning, I noticed something else. A faint trail of envelopes on the hallway table, bills again. This time, I didn't pretend not to see. I picked one up, saw my own name listed as a secondary guarantor. I blinked, stunned. I hadn't signed anything like that. My hands started to shake. I checked another envelope. Same thing. My signature perfectly forged. My own son had used my identity to secure loans. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly, wearing your child's face. I felt dizzy, cold, and yet a strange calm settled over me. I put the envelopes back exactly where I found them and went to make tea. That's what you do when your world collapses quietly. You make tea. Boil the water, pour, sip, pretend. As I stirred the sugar, I thought of something peculiar. I'd read once about Japanese family customs when parents become dependent. Some children ceremonially adopt them back into the household, an act of honor and duty. In some Western cultures, though, that same dependency is seen as weakness. People still debate whether independence is freedom or isolation. Sitting there in my kitchen, I realized I'd become a ghost of both. That night, I waited for Ethan to come home. When he finally did, he smelled faintly of whiskey and exhaustion. I asked how work was. He said, "Fine, too fast." I smiled, handed him tea, and asked Ethan, "Do you remember the day your father and I bought this house?" He looked up, startled. "Of course," he said, unsure where I was going. I nodded. He told me once that if a lie enters a home, it doesn't leave until it burns something down. You believe that? His face tightened. "Mom, please don't start with—" "Just answer," I said softly. "Do you believe it?" He hesitated, then muttered, "Sure." I smiled sweetly. "Good, because I think something's burning." He didn't understand then, but soon he would. I woke up early the next morning, long before sunrise, when the world still feels like it's holding its secrets tight. The kitchen smelled of stale coffee and cold regret. I sat at the table in my robe, staring at those envelopes again, every one of them stamped with reminders and threats like bruises on paper. I told myself not to cry, not yet. There would be time for that later, after I figured out just how deep my son had buried himself. And me. When I worked as a nurse, I learned a strange truth. People rarely admit the extent of their pain until the infection starts to show. The same goes for families. We keep the infection hidden under smiles and Sunday dinners until it festers so long that it bursts open in public. That morning, I realized Ethan's infection had been festering for months, years maybe, and I had mistaken it for maturity. I made a list the old-fashioned way on paper. Every name, every number, every bank address from the letters. If my son thought I was too old to understand debt, he'd forgotten who raised him. I'd spent 30 years managing hospital budgets, balancing care with cost-soothing, worried families while insurance departments chewed them alive. Money I understood. Lies I recognized. What I didn't understand was how my own son could sign my name on his debt papers. Around 9, I called the loan agency, pretending to be a confused mother wanting clarification. The man on the other end was polite, too polite, the kind of politeness that covers guilt. He told me they couldn't disclose details without my son's permission. But when I mentioned the signature, his tone shifted. "Mrs. Lawson, may I confirm, did you sign the guarantor form dated April 12th last year?" I said quietly. "No, I did not." There was a pause. The kind of pause that carries both surprise and sympathy. "Then you may want to come down here in person," he said gently. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't a misunderstanding, it was fraud. My own son had forged my name to secure a loan. I hung up, sat back, and let the silence swallow me whole. The funny part, I didn't feel rage. Not yet. I felt something colder, heavier, the grief of realizing that love doesn't always prevent betrayal. It sometimes makes it easier. Because who else would you dare to deceive if not the one person who's already forgiven you everything? Later that day, while Ethan was at work, I went into his study. I hadn't been in there for months. It was his sacred space where he handled important things. But now I saw it for what it was, chaos disguised as productivity. Stacks of unopened mail, bank statements, letters from credit collectors. A photo of him with his family smiled from the shelf, perfect and false. I sat in his leather chair and pulled open the top drawer. That's when I found it, an official-looking folder marked private. Inside were documents, loan agreements, extension requests, and notices from collection agencies. But the strangest thing wasn't the numbers. It was the desperation in his handwriting scrawled in the margins. "Just one more payment. It'll turn around. Don't tell Mom." I pressed my fingers against the words, feeling a rush of conflicting emotions, anger, pity, disbelief. I wanted to storm into his office and demand answers, but something told me to wait. My son was sinking, yes, but if I confronted him now, he'd drag me under with him. So I closed the drawer and did what every wounded mother does. I went to bake something. Don't laugh. There's comfort in dough. You mix chaos and control it with your hands until it softens. I baked banana bread the way I used to when Ethan was 10 and scared of thunderstorms. As the smell filled the house, I thought about how life had turned upside down back then. He ran to me for safety. Now I was the storm, and he didn't even know it yet. That evening, Melissa came home early. Her eyes darted nervously toward me as she set her purse down. "Ethan's working late," she said, voice too light. I nodded, slicing the bread. "Would you like some?" She hesitated, then sat. For a while, we ate in silence until she whispered, "He's trying, you know." I raised an eyebrow. "Trying what?" She fiddled with her ring. "To fix things. The business deal went bad and he didn't know how to tell you." There it was, the truth, or at least her version of it. I wanted to ask, "Did you know about the forged signature?" But instead, I said calmly, "Melissa, we all make mistakes. but hiding them doesn't fix them. It multiplies them. She looked up, her eyes shiny. He thought he could protect you. I almost laughed. Protect me? By stealing my name, by making me legally responsible for his debt. That wasn't protection. It was cowardice dressed as care. There's an odd fact about inheritance laws I once read in some states. If a parent co-signs or their signature is forged, the responsibility can still fall on the parent unless proven otherwise. Meaning technically I could lose everything, my savings, my pension, my freedom because of his lie. People still debate whether such laws protect families or destroy them. I already knew my answer. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily. I thought about my husband again, his calm, steady eyes, his way of saying, "You don't fix betrayal by shouting. You fix it by letting them see what they broke." I realized that was exactly what I was going to do. No yelling, no tears, just quiet, deliberate truth. Before dawn, I packed a small bag and slipped out. I went to the bank, to the loan office, and then to a notary. Paper trails, signatures, timestamps, I collected them all. If my son had built his world on lies, I would build mine on proof. By the time I returned home, the sun was up, spilling light across the kitchen floor. I looked around the quiet house, the pictures, the toys, the half-washed dishes, and I felt something strange. Not sadness, not fury, power, the kind that comes from knowing the truth when everyone else is still pretending. That afternoon, just as I was folding laundry, I heard a knock at the door. Not a friendly one, the kind that comes with a rhythm too firm, too practiced. When I opened it, a man in a dark suit stood there holding a clipboard and wearing an apologetic half-smile. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "I'm looking for Mr. Ethan Lawson." His badge caught the sunlight, Mid-State Financial Recovery Services. I felt my stomach drop. I told him Ethan wasn't home. He nodded politely, but his eyes flickered toward the living room where children's toys were scattered. "Do you happen to know when he'll be available? It's regarding an outstanding balance." I invited him in because that's what polite people do even when their world is collapsing. We sat at the dining table and I served him tea. Old habits die hard. The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Lawson," he began, "I understand this is delicate, but we've been trying to reach your son for months. He listed this address as his primary residence, and there's also—" He paused, searching for words. "Your name attached as guarantor on one of the accounts." I smiled, calm but sharp. "You mean the account he forged my name for?" His eyes widened. "So you're aware?" I nodded. "More aware than he thinks." The man sighed, his shoulders lowering with relief. "In that case, ma'am, you may want to file a report. Forgery is serious, but if you act now, you could protect your assets." I thanked him, took his card, and saw myself reflected in his sunglasses as he stood to leave. I looked composed, but inside my heart was thrumming like a drum. As the door closed behind him, I sat back at the table, staring at the teacups, mine half empty, his untouched. It felt symbolic. Families are like teacups. They crack quietly before they shatter. You don't always hear the breaking point until it's too late. When Ethan returned home that evening, I noticed the tension in his movements, rushed jittery eyes darting everywhere but mine. "We had a visitor today," I said casually, stirring my tea. He froze mid-step. "Who, a man from mid-state? He wanted to see you." His expression faltered just long enough to confirm everything. "Oh, that!" he said quickly, waving his hand. "It's under control, Mom. You shouldn't have talked to him." "Funny," I said softly. "That's what people say when nothing's under control." He glared at me, a flash of irritation replacing guilt. "You don't understand how this works. I just needed some liquidity for the business. It's not a big deal." I smiled. "Ah, yes, the famous not a big deal. The phrase people use right before bankruptcy." He clenched his jaw. "Mom, please don't start. You've been freeloading here for years. You don't get to judge my choices." Freeloading. The word hit harder than burden ever did. It was a demotion from family to parasite. I took a slow breath, letting the silence grow heavy. I didn't think love was supposed to have a ledger, I said quietly. "But apparently, you've been keeping one." He scoffed. "It's not like that. Then what's it like, Ethan? You forge my name, risk my savings, and then tell me it's fine." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing like a trapped animal. "I'll fix it, okay? Just give me time." "How much?" I asked. He hesitated. "A few months." I nodded. That's what people always say when they don't have a plan. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then I said, "A banker told me to report you." He looked up sharply, his face draining of color. "You wouldn't, Wouldn't I said, tilting my head. You've already reported me by signing my name without permission. There's a fact most families don't like to admit. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, it just delays them. People still debate whether protecting a loved one from punishment helps or harms them. I knew my answer now. Protecting him had turned him into someone capable of stealing from me. That night, the house was silent, except for the rain tapping against the windows. I sat in my husband's old chair with the banker's card in my hand, thinking of all the quiet sacrifices we'd made for our son. We used to joke that children are like mirrors. You see your best and worst reflected back. But mirrors don't lie. They just show you what you refused to see earlier. The next morning, Melissa found me reading in the kitchen. She looked pale eyes puffy from crying. He told me everything, she whispered. I raised an eyebrow. Everything, the loans, the business failures, the forged signature. He said he did it to keep us all afloat. She bit her lip. He didn't want to lose the house. I nodded slowly. And what did he lose instead? She looked away, ashamed. You. For the first time, I felt something soften inside me. Not forgiveness, but pity. Ethan wasn't cruel by nature. He was scared. And fear makes people do ugly things. Still, fear doesn't excuse betrayal, it just explains it. I reached over, touched her hand gently, and said, Melissa, I need you to understand something. I'm not your enemy. But if he drags this house down, I won't drown with him. Later that day, I went to the lawyer's office. My late husband's attorney, Mr. Harper, still remembered me. A thin man with kind eyes and a memory sharp as ever, Mrs. Lawson, he said, adjusting his glasses. What brings you in today? I smiled politely. I believe my son may have compromised my finances. I need to understand my legal position. He leaned back, thoughtful. You're not the first parent to sit in that chair with that story. It's more common than you'd think. He explained that while forgery was a crime, family cases often got handled privately. But he also reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten, a clause in my husband's will that gave me exclusive rights over certain assets if I ever became financially endangered. You could invoke it, he said. It would secure your half of the estate and freeze any shared accounts. I stared at him, stunned. You mean I can protect myself without pressing charges? He nodded. Exactly, quietly. Legally. For the first time in weeks, I felt the air return to my lungs. Maybe this wasn't about punishment anymore. Maybe it was about reclaiming control. When I walked out of that office, the sun was bright and the wind smelled of new beginnings. I realized something as I stood on the sidewalk. A parent's love might be endless, but it should never be blind. The drive home from the lawyer's office was strangely quiet, almost peaceful, like the calm after a storm that had been brewing too long. I kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the folder Mr. Harper had given me. Inside were copies of legal documents, a list of options, and something even more powerful, a plan. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. When I arrived home, the house looked the same as always, but once you know a secret, even the furniture feels like it's watching you. Melissa's car was gone. Ethan's too. I walked through the kitchen, set the folder on the counter, and made myself tea. Always tea. It's funny how people use small rituals to keep themselves sane while the ground shifts under their feet. My husband used to say that boiling water is therapy. You can't rush calm, he'd say. And he was right. As I sipped, I stared at the family photos on the wall. Ethan at graduation grinning like the world was his. Ethan holding his first baby eyes full of hope. I wondered if he'd recognize the man he'd become, the one so desperate for success that he'd steal from the woman who once carried his school lunches in the rain. There's an irony in parenthood. You spend your life teaching your children how to be honest, responsible, and kind, only to watch the world teach them the opposite faster than you can correct it. That evening, I waited up for him. Midnight came and went. Around 1 a.m, I heard his car in the driveway. When he walked in, his tie was loose, his face pale. "You're still up?" he asked, startled. "I wanted to talk," I said calmly. He groaned. "Mom, not tonight, please. I've had the worst day." I gestured to the chair. "Then sit down. This won't take long." He sighed, sat rubbing his temples like a man twice his age. "Look, if this is about the loans." "It's not," I interrupted. "It's about your father." He frowned. "Dad?" "Yes. He left a clause in his will protecting my assets, meaning if anyone tried to jeopardize them intentionally or not, I could revoke their access, including you." His eyes widened. "You wouldn't," I smiled softly. You keep saying that, Ethan, as if you're sure I'm still the same woman who used to clean up your messes. I'm not. He leaned forward, panic flickering beneath his anger. If you do this, you'll ruin me. No, I said gently. You did that yourself. I'm just choosing not to join you. He slammed his fist on the table, making the teacups rattle. You can't just cut me off. I looked him dead in the eye. Watch me. There's a fact about family dynamics that few admit out loud: power shifts with dependency. The moment a parent stops enabling the child has to face their own adulthood, often for the first time. People still debate whether tough love is cruelty or compassion. Sitting there, I decided it was survival. Ethan stood abruptly pacing the kitchen like a trapped animal. You're not being fair, he snapped. You don't understand how hard it is to keep this house, to take care of everyone, to what I cut in. To live beyond your means, to pretend you're fine while drowning us both. He stopped, shoulders heaving. I did it for you, he said finally, his voice cracking. I didn't want you to worry. I laughed, then not cruelly, just tiredly. Oh, Ethan, you didn't want me to know. There's a difference. He looked at me, eyes glistening, and for a second I saw my boy again, the one who used to cry when he broke his toys, terrified I'd be angry. But I wasn't angry then, and I wasn't angry now, just heartbroken. I'm calling Mr. Harper tomorrow, I said quietly. He'll activate the clause. It will secure my share of the assets, including the emergency account your father left. You'll have to manage your debts on your own. His jaw tightened. So, that's it. You're abandoning me. I shook my head. No, Ethan. I'm setting you free. He didn't respond. He just stared at me, breathing hard, then grabbed his jacket and stormed out the door, slamming behind him so hard the picture frames rattled. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty chair across from me. Sometimes, silence isn't peace. It's aftermath. The next day, Melissa came downstairs late, her eyes red. He didn't come home last night, she said, voice trembling. Do you think he'll be okay? I nodded slowly. He's stronger than he thinks. He just needs to face himself. I didn't tell her about the bank appointment I had that afternoon, or that I'd already moved my savings into a protected account. For once, my silence was strategy, not weakness. That afternoon at the bank, I signed the papers Mr. Harper had prepared. It was quick, almost anticlimactic. A few signatures, a few stamps, and just like that, the balance of power shifted back into my hands. I walked out lighter, almost dizzy with relief. On my way home, I stopped by the park where Ethan used to play as a kid. The benches were the same, the swings still creaking in the wind. I sat there for a while, remembering how he used to run toward me with scraped knees and a smile that could erase every worry. I whispered to the wind, I hope you find that boy again. That night, he finally came home. His clothes were wrinkled, his face pale, and there was something different in his eyes, something broken. Mom, he said quietly, I'm sorry. His voice trembled like a confession half swallowed by pride. I looked at him, unsure whether to comfort or challenge him, so I did both. I know you are, I said softly, but apologies don't erase signatures. You'll need to start making things right. He nodded, eyes down. I will. And for the first time, I believed he meant it. Still deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Forgiveness would take time, and truth, as my husband once said, would keep burning until there was nothing left to hide. For a few weeks, the house settled into an uneasy quiet like a battlefield, after the smoke clears but before the survivors dare to speak. Ethan became strangely polite, offering to make dinner, fixing the creaky door, complimenting my tea, even when it was overbrewed. It was the politeness of guilt, fragile and temporary, but I let it be. Sometimes people need to pretend things are normal before they can face how broken they really are. Melissa, meanwhile, walked on eggshells. Her smiles were tight, her laughter cautious. I could feel her sympathy tugging between loyalty to her husband and a quiet understanding of me. We were both women trying to hold the same family from different ends of the rope, afraid that if either of us let go, the whole thing would unravel. One night, while Ethan was upstairs with the kids, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and whispered, He's drowning, you know. He won't admit it, but the debt, it's worse than he told you. I looked at her, searching her eyes. How bad? She hesitated. He owes money to private lenders now, people who don't wait politely. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Private lenders. The phrase alone carried menace. I sipped my tea, trying to steady my breath. And you, I asked, how are you handling it? Her lip trembled. I don't sleep much. I keep thinking they'll come here one night. That night, I lay awake for hours, listening to every creak and gust of wind, imagining strangers knocking at our door. There's an odd fact about fear. It sharpens the senses, but dulls the heart. You start hearing everything, but feeling nothing. I thought about the years I'd worked night shifts, comforting patients who feared dying alone, and now here I was, fearing living with my own son. People still debate whether blood truly binds or simply blinds. The next morning, Ethan seemed cheerful again, too cheerful. He handed me flowers, cheap grocery store daisies, and kissed my cheek like a little boy trying to erase punishment with affection. "Things are turning around, Mom," he said brightly. "You'll see." I smiled, playing along, though his optimism scared me more than his anger ever did. It meant he was lying again. Later that day, while he was at work, I took a slow walk through the house. It's strange how silence exposes things. I noticed the mail pile again, letters shoved under magazines, some unopened. My fingers itched. I lifted one envelope, saw the red ink, and slipped it open just enough to read final notice. The amount was staggering. My knees weakened. It was clear now Ethan wasn't just in debt. He was in danger. That evening, I tried to talk to him gently. "Ethan, I need you to be honest with me. Is someone threatening you?" He froze, then forced a laugh. "Mom, please. You've been watching too many dramas." "Answer me," I pressed. He sighed, his voice low. "It's fine. I just borrowed from a few independent investors. They're helping me restructure." "Independent investors," I repeated. "That's a creative way to say loan sharks." His jaw tightened. "Don't worry about it. I'll handle it." I felt my pulse quicken. "Handle it how? With what money?" He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up his jacket and left again, muttering, "You'll see." After he left, Melissa came downstairs, pale as paper. "He told you, didn't he?" she whispered. I nodded. "He told me something. Not the truth." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "They called the house yesterday. I picked up by accident. They said if he doesn't pay by the end of the month, they'll take collateral." I think they meant this house. For a moment, the room spun. I sat down, gripping the table edge. "Collateral," I repeated softly. That's what I was to him once. Collateral with a heartbeat. The next morning, I called Mr. Harper again. I needed advice, not legal this time, but moral. "You're not just a lawyer," I told him. "You've seen what happens when families turn against themselves." He sighed, his voice heavy with years. "Yes, Mrs. Lawson, I've seen it too often. Children drowning in debt, parents caught in the undertow. Most parents bail them out again and again, hoping love will fix what money broke." "And does it?" I asked quietly. "Never," he said. "It just teaches them that someone will always pay the bill for their mistakes." His words echoed in my mind all day. I realized I'd spent years paying invisible bills, emotional ones, not financial. Every time I excused Ethan's selfishness, every time I swallowed hurt for peace. And now, peace had expired. That evening, I made dinner, his favorite stew with extra thyme and potatoes, the smell filling the house with something that almost felt like home. When he came in, surprised, I smiled warmly. "Sit. Eat." He obeyed, eyes wary but hungry. Halfway through the meal, I said I went to the lawyer again. He froze mid-bite. "Why?" "Because the house isn't just yours, Ethan. It's part of the estate. I made sure the deed reflects that now." His fork clattered. "You what I protected, what's left of your father's legacy," I said. "And mine." He looked at me like I'd betrayed him, but I held his gaze. "I know you think I'm against you," I said softly, "but I'm trying to save what's still worth saving. There's a strange truth about families. Love and control often wear the same face. People still debate whether protecting someone from themselves is love or cruelty." I'd stopped caring what it looked like. I knew what it felt like, and it felt like survival. That night, after everyone went to bed, I walked through the dark house barefoot on the cold tiles. The walls hummed with the quiet of sleeping children, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock above the mantel. I stopped by the window and looked out into the night where the faint reflection of my face stared back. I didn't look like a victim anymore. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly, headlights slicing through the curtains. My heart leapt before logic returned. It was probably nothing, but fear leaves fingerprints on your nerves, and mine were covered in them. I realized then that I couldn't just protect my finances. I had to protect myself. So I made a plan, one that Ethan didn't need to know about. The next morning, I woke before dawn and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open, steam from my tea curling up like fog around my thoughts. Planning always gave me calm, a small island of control in a sea of chaos. My husband used to tease me about it, calling me the architect. And maybe he was right, because that morning I began to quietly rebuild the foundation of my life without Ethan realizing a single brick was moving. The first thing I did was contact Mr. Harper again, asking him to review my late husband's estate documents in full detail. He agreed to meet that afternoon. I told him there was one specific clause I wanted to invoke the inheritance protection provision. It wasn't much, but it was enough to shift power from Ethan's hands back into mine. Then I called the financial advisor who had handled my pension. We hadn't spoken in years. His voice was cautious, professional. When I explained what was happening, he said something that stuck with me. Mrs. Lawson, protecting your money isn't betrayal, it's boundary. That word boundary hit me harder than I expected, because I realized I hadn't had one in years. I had mistaken sacrifice for love and silence for harmony, and in doing so I'd trained my son to think both were infinite resources. Around mid-morning I drove to the lawyer's office again. The weather was cold, brittle, like the air itself had judgment. Inside, Mr. Harper already had the documents ready. "If you sign here," he said, tapping the paper gently, "this will legally separate your portion of the inheritance. It won't stop your son's creditors, but it will prevent them from touching what's yours." I picked up the pen. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I doubted the choice, but because I finally understood its meaning. I was choosing myself. I signed. My signature looked steady, but my hand trembled just enough to remind me that love doesn't end cleanly. It bleeds a little on the paper. When I left, the wind bit at my face, sharp and cleansing. I stopped at a small cafe across the street, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window. That's when I saw something odd across the street. Ethan was standing outside the bank. He didn't see me. He was talking to a man in a dark coat, the kind of man who doesn't look like he belongs in daylight. Their conversation was tense gestures, sharp. My stomach twisted. This wasn't business, it was desperation. He got into his car and drove off, fast tires squealing. I waited a few minutes, then followed at a distance. I know mothers aren't supposed to spy on their grown sons, but at that point, motherly etiquette was the least of my concerns. He drove to a strip mall at the edge of town and parked behind an old pawn shop. I watched him hand a small velvet box to the man from before who counted cash and shoved it into Ethan's hand. I knew that box. It was my husband's watch, the one I'd kept in the cedar drawer for 20 years. My chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. I waited until the man left, then stepped out of my car and walked up to Ethan. He jumped when he saw me, guilt flashing across his face. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he stammered. "I could ask you the same," I said. My voice sounded calm, but it wasn't the calm of peace. It was the calm before lightning. "That watch was your father's." He swallowed hard. "I needed the money just for a week." "A week," I interrupted. "You pawned your father's memory for a week." He rubbed his face, groaning. "You don't understand, Mom. These people—" "Oh, I understand perfectly," I snapped. "You're selling off pieces of our life to pay debts you shouldn't have made. You lied, you forged, and now you're pawning what's sacred." He looked like a man cornered. "I'll buy it back," he said weakly. "I promise." I shook my head slowly. Promises from debtors are like paper in the rain. They dissolve before you finish reading them. He didn't argue. Just stared at the ground, shoulders sagging. I realized then that shame had finally reached him, the real kind, the kind that doesn't come from getting caught, but from recognizing what you've become. There's a peculiar truth I once read about inheritance laws in ancient Rome. Heirs could refuse an inheritance if it came with more debt than wealth. People still debate whether that was wisdom or cowardice. Watching my son that day, I finally understood the wisdom in walking away from what poisons you. That evening, I went home and sat alone in the living room. The children were upstairs, Melissa was quiet in her room, and the house glowed with the eerie calm of exhaustion. I opened the old family photo album again this time, to a picture of my husband holding newborn Ethan. His eyes looked proud, unshakably proud. I whispered to the photo, "You wouldn't recognize him now." But then as I stared at that picture, I felt a new realization. Maybe Ethan's downfall wasn't just his fault. Maybe we'd built him wrong. We'd made life too easy, too safe. We thought protecting him from hardship was love, but it was insulation. And insulation, if too thick, suffocates. The next morning, I called the pawn shop. The man on the line said the watch was already gone. Sold. I thanked him and hung up. My heart ached, but oddly, it also hardened. The last tie to my husband was gone, but so was my hesitation. I decided I would no longer react. I would act. I called Mr. Harper again and told him to begin transferring my name onto every remaining asset quietly, discreetly. I also asked him to prepare one more thing, a revision to my will. He paused. A revision, yes, I said firmly. A conditional inheritance. If Ethan ever wants to see a cent of my estate, he'll have to earn it, not by begging, but by repaying. When I hung up, I felt lighter. It wasn't revenge, it was structure. For the first time in years, my future didn't depend on anyone's apology. That night I slept through the night for the first time in months. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I was no longer a burden, I was the storm my son never saw coming. The next morning began like any other soft sunlight streaming through the curtains, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the quiet murmur of life going on. But inside me, everything had changed. I wasn't the frightened mother waiting for her son's next apology. I was the woman who'd finally learned that love without boundaries is just permission for destruction. I had signed the papers, locked my finances, and now it was time to face the emotional aftermath, the part that no lawyer could fix. Ethan avoided me for 2 days. Melissa tried to play peacemaker, leaving notes on the fridge with cheerful reminders, dinner at 6. Don't forget the kids' recital, as if politeness could glue back the fractures in our home. But politeness is a thin wallpaper over a moldy wall. The silence underneath always grows. On the third night, I came downstairs for a glass of water and found Ethan sitting alone in the dark living room. The only light came from the muted television flickering blue over his face. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, eyes heavy with sleeplessness. "You're still up?" I asked softly. He didn't look at me. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered. I sat on the couch opposite him. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. Finally, he sighed. "I talked to the bank today. They said the accounts are now under your name." His tone wasn't angry, just resigned. I nodded. Yes, it was time. He leaned back, rubbing his face. "Do you even trust me anymore?" I looked at him steadily. "Trust isn't something you inherit, Ethan. It's something you maintain. And you stopped maintaining it a long time ago." He swallowed hard. "You think I meant to hurt you?" I smiled sadly. "Intentions don't erase outcomes. You meant to fix your problems, but you used me as the tool." He looked away, his voice low. I didn't know what else to do. And that's when it hit me, he really didn't. For all his confidence and charm, Ethan had never learned to fail safely. We'd raised him to succeed, but never to recover. And without resilience, success is just a glass tower, beautiful, fragile, and destined to crack. There's a sociological fact I once read that made more sense now than ever in modern households. Multi-generational living often revives old hierarchies. Parents become dependents, children become providers, and resentment grows like ivy around a broken fence. People still debate whether such arrangements strengthen families or slowly poison them. I could now say from personal experience that it depends on who's holding the power and how they use it. I decided not to argue anymore. "Ethan," I said gently, "you're not a bad man, but you're a lost one. And being lost doesn't give you permission to drag others into your wilderness." He didn't reply, just sat there staring at the dark screen as if hoping it would flicker to life with an answer. I stood about to leave when he whispered, "Mom, I might lose everything." I turned. "Then maybe it's time you rebuild something better." The next few weeks unfolded like quiet ripples. Ethan's business closed officially. The house became a temporary office of damage control phone calls, meetings, long silences punctuated by sighs. Melissa was stretched thin, balancing the children's school and her husband's emotional collapse. I did what I'd always done, kept the house running, fed the family, stayed steady. But this time, I didn't do it out of obligation. I did it because I wanted the children, my grandchildren, to see that steadiness didn't mean weakness. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, Melissa appeared in the doorway, clutching a small envelope. "This came for you," she said, handing it over. The return address made my stomach twist. State Debt Recovery Department. I opened it slowly. Inside was a notice Ethan's outstanding loans had defaulted, and as the former listed guarantor, I was being notified of proceedings. But then in bold letters, it read, "Verified fraud claim voided." Mr. Harper had done it. My name was cleared. I felt an immense rush of relief followed immediately by grief. My freedom had come at the cost of my son's ruin. I set the letter down and whispered, "Thank you, not sure whether I meant to God my husband's memory or the lawyer who had quietly saved me." That evening, Ethan came home late, eyes hollow. "They froze my accounts," he said flatly. "I can't even pay the electric bill." I took a deep breath. "You'll get through it," How he asked bitterly. "By learning," I said, "by failing honestly for once." He looked at me, anger flashing. "You make it sound easy." I shook my head. "It's not easy, but it's necessary." He stood pacing. "You've always had it together, haven't you?" "You never made mistakes," I laughed softly. "Oh, Ethan, I made plenty, but I never pretended they didn't exist. That's the difference." He glared at me, then exhaled slowly, deflating. "I don't even know who I am anymore." I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Then it's time you find out, without loans, without lies. Just you." That night, for the first time, he didn't storm off. He just sat down, head in his hands, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything." I wanted to say something profound, but instead I did what mothers do. I made tea. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need fireworks. It just needs warmth. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Ethan found a part-time job. Not glamorous, not prestigious warehouse work, manual labor, long hours, low pay. But it was honest. When he told me, I saw a flicker of shame mixed with pride. "It's temporary," he said quickly, "but it's something." I smiled. "It's more than something. It's a start." That night, Melissa hugged me quietly and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on him." I smiled sadly. I didn't do it for him. I did it for the kids. They deserve to see what accountability looks like. A week later, I got another call from Mr. Harper again. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, "I've finalized the new version of your will. You'll want to review it." I went in the next day. The document was straightforward. My estate would bypass Ethan entirely and go directly to the grandchildren in a trust contingent on their education and well-being. Ethan would only gain access if he could prove stable income and no outstanding debts for 3 consecutive years. I read it twice, then signed it. It wasn't punishment, it was protection. When I got home, I found Ethan fixing the back fence. He looked tired but focused. I handed him a glass of lemonade. "You're working hard," I said. He smiled faintly. "Feels good to fix something real." I nodded. "Keep doing that and you'll fix more than you think." We stood in silence, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and crimson. The yard smelled of grass and sawdust. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. But life has a way of testing peace. That evening, as we were finishing dinner, there was a loud knock on the door, hard, impatient. Ethan stiffened instantly. Melissa froze. The kids looked up from their plates, wide-eyed. I felt my stomach twist. I opened the door slowly. 2 men in suits stood outside, not from a bank this time, but from a recovery agency. "We're looking for Mr. Lawson," one said firmly. "We need to verify his residency." Ethan came to the door, his face pale. "I live here," he said quietly. The man nodded. "Then this is for you." He handed him an envelope and walked away without another word. Ethan's hands trembled as he opened it. His voice cracked as he read aloud, "Property claim in review. Pending repossession." Melissa gasped. "The house?" Ethan nodded weakly. My mind raced. Then I remembered the deed was under my name now. I reached for the letter, scanned it, then smiled faintly. "They can't touch it," I said. "It's protected." Ethan looked at me, tears brimming in his eyes. "You saved it," I nodded. "No, I saved us, but only this once." He broke, then truly broke. He sank to his knees, sobbing into his hands. Melissa wrapped her arms around him, crying too. I just stood there, steady, a quiet pillar in the storm. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I'd already spent all my tears years ago. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was calm again, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The moon hung low and full, casting silver over the yard. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the debts, the heartbreak, and felt both old and unshakably alive. Maybe pain wasn't the opposite of love after all. Maybe it was its most honest expression, the part that demands growth. I whispered into the night, "We'll be okay," not knowing whether I was reassuring myself, my son, or the ghost of my husband. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen like forgiveness, soft, hesitant, but real. For the first time in months, the air in the house didn't feel heavy. Ethan came downstairs early, already dressed for work, his shirt a little wrinkled, his face still tired, but his eyes steadier. He poured himself coffee without a word, then glanced at me. "I'll be late tonight," he said. "Overtime." I smiled. "Good. Overtime is where redemption lives." He actually laughed, a short, surprised laugh that sounded human again. "You and your sayings," he said. "You should write a book." "I already did," I teased, tapping my temple. "It's written right here, in Bad Decisions and Expensive Lessons." After he left, I sat by the window and watched the streets slowly come alive. Neighbors leaving for work, kids racing to the bus stop, the mailman stopping at each gate. Life didn't pause for personal disasters. It just kept moving, indifferent and kind, all at once. Maybe that's why healing feels so confusing. It happens quietly while you're busy folding laundry or watering plants, until one day you realize the ache has dulled. Later that week, Melissa and I took the grandchildren to the park. The youngest, Lily, ran ahead with her kite, laughing so hard she tripped on her own feet. As I helped her up, she said, "Grandma, Daddy says you're brave." I smiled. "Did he?" "Yeah," she said proudly. "He said you saved our house." My heart clenched, soft and warm. "Well," I whispered, brushing her hair back, "sometimes being brave just means not giving up when you really want to." She nodded like she understood every word, even though she couldn't possibly yet. When we got home, Ethan was already back earlier than expected. He was sitting at the dining table surrounded by papers, not bills this time, but job applications and forms. "I'm looking for something better," he said quietly, almost shyly. I looked over his shoulder. "Warehouse work not enough." He smiled faintly. "It's honest, but it's not the life I want for the kids. I've been talking to a friend about a management program. It'll take time, but maybe I can start again." I placed my hand on his shoulder the way I used to when he was little and uncertain. "Starting again is the bravest thing a man can do," I said. He looked up at me with eyes that were finally his father's, again calm, determined, humble. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I met his gaze and replied, "Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about deciding to stop carrying someone else's mistakes inside your heart." That night, I went through my old boxes and found a small sealed envelope addressed to me in my husband's handwriting. I must have overlooked it years ago. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short note written in his tidy, deliberate script. "If you ever find yourself alone against the world, remember you are the strongest part of this family. Protect them, even from themselves, if you must. But never let their weakness make you small. You are the keeper of the light." I read it 3 times, tears spilling onto the paper. It felt like he'd written it for this exact moment, as if he knew the storm that would one day come. I whispered, "I did what you told me. Love." I kept the light on. Over the next few days, things began to change subtly around the house. The children laughed louder. Melissa smiled more easily. Ethan came home tired, but content, his face no longer shadowed by dread. We had dinner together again, not forced, but natural. I'd forgotten how healing shared silence could be when it's no longer heavy with blame. One evening after dinner, Ethan said, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we sold the business assets, what's left of them. Start clean." I nodded. "That's a good idea. Let go of the dead weight before it drags you again." He smiled. "You always know what to say." "Decades of practice," I said, laughing softly, "and one very stubborn son." He grinned for the first time in months. "Yeah, stubbornness runs in the family." "Maybe," I said. "But it's also what saves us." A week later, the auction took place. Computers, office furniture, and equipment from Ethan's failed company. I went with him not because I needed to, but because I wanted him to see that standing beside someone doesn't mean rescuing them. It means witnessing their growth. The room was filled with the echo of numbers, bids, and murmurs. Watching strangers claim the remnants of his old life should have been sad, but instead it felt cleansing, like burning away dead wood so something new could grow. As the last item sold, Ethan turned to me and whispered, "It's strange, Mom. I thought this would destroy me, but it just feels freeing." I smiled. "That's because you stopped running from the fire. You walked through it." There's a psychological concept I once read about post-traumatic growth. It says that some people don't just recover from pain, they evolve because of it. They become stronger, wiser, more grounded. People still debate whether that's optimism or delusion, but watching my son that day, I believed it. Pain hadn't just changed him, it had recalibrated him. That evening, after the auction, we went for a quiet walk through the park. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Ethan spoke softly, more to himself than to me. "You know, I used to think success was about money. Now I think it's about not losing yourself when everything else disappears." I nodded. "That's a better definition." "Maybe you should write that book," he laughed. "Maybe I will." When we got home, he handed me a small box. "Open it," he said. Inside was a silver pocket watch, an exact replica of the one he'd pawned. My throat tightened. "Ethan?" "It's not the same," he said quickly, "but I wanted you to have it. I'll find the real one someday, I promise." I touched the cool metal, my heart full. "It's not about the watch," I said quietly. "It's about the man who bought it." That night, I placed the new watch on my bedside table next to my husband's old photo. I thought about how life comes full circle, how love can shatter and rebuild in the same breath. The next morning, I woke early and made breakfast for everyone, pancakes, the kind Ethan used to beg for when he was 8. As we all sat down together, laughter filled the room again. It wasn't the same as before. It was quieter, wiser, a little bruised, but it was real. After breakfast, as Ethan helped clear the table, he said, "Mom, I don't know how to thank you." I smiled. "Live better. That's thanks enough." He nodded, eyes glassy, but proud. "I will." And for once, I didn't doubt it. I could finally see it in him, the steadiness, the humility, the man his father always hoped he'd become. As I poured myself another cup of tea, I realized something profound. Maybe the truth about being called a burden wasn't about weight at all. It was about value. A burden is only heavy when the person carrying it hasn't learned what it's worth. And sometimes it takes losing everything to see that what you were carrying was never a burden. It was a gift that taught you strength. A few months passed, and life began to settle into something almost ordinary again, though nothing about the past year had been ordinary. The seasons shifted. The trees outside the kitchen window burned gold and red before turning bare. Time, as it always does, worked its slow magic, smoothing the edges of everything sharp. The house no longer echoed with tension. There was laughter again, real laughter, the kind that doesn't hide behind politeness. But even as peace returned, I could feel that something deeper had changed in all of us. We were no longer the same family that had once eaten dinner together with quiet resentment simmering under every word. We had been remade in the fire of truth. Ethan still worked long hours at the warehouse, but he no longer avoided eye contact when he came home. He'd started a small night course in accounting, said he wanted to learn how money really worked this time. I didn't say much, just smiled and told him I was proud. Pride used to be a word that tasted like salt to me, something earned at a cost, but now it tasted clean like rain after drought. One Sunday morning, I walked into the living room and found him teaching his eldest son how to balance a checkbook. It was such a small, ordinary thing, but it filled my chest with something vast and warm. You see, he was telling the boy, you don't spend money. You don't have, even if you think you'll get it soon. You respect the numbers. They tell you the truth. I stood quietly in the doorway, remembering how long it had taken him to respect that truth himself. Later that day, Melissa joined me in the garden while the kids played. She knelt beside me, hands in the dirt, and said softly, "He's different now." I nodded. "Pain will do that. It burns the arrogance first, then lights what's left." She smiled faintly. "He told me you saved him." I shook my head. "No, he saved himself. I just stopped helping him drown." We both laughed, the easy kind that only women who've survived storms can share. For the first time, she looked at me not as her husband's mother, but as her ally, her mirror. We'd both learned what it meant to love someone who was flawed, and to stay anyway, not out of blindness, but courage. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, Ethan surprised me. He slid a folded document across the table. "It's for you," he said. I opened it carefully. It was a bank statement, a new savings account. "I've been putting something aside every week," he explained, "to pay you back for what I took. It's not much yet, but it's honest." I looked at him for a long moment before replying. "Ethan," I said softly, "you can't repay love with money." He nodded. "I know, but I can honor it with effort. There's a fact about family repair I once read: when trust is broken, it doesn't return in grand gestures. It rebuilds through repetition. 1,000 small acts of honesty strung together over time become the new foundation. People still debate whether relationships can truly heal after betrayal. I think they can, but only when both sides stop pretending and start working. A few weeks later, I decided to visit my husband's grave. I hadn't been there since everything happened. The cemetery was quiet, the air crisp. I brought fresh lilies, his favorite, and a small note. I knelt down, brushed away the leaves, and whispered, "You'd be proud of him. It took nearly losing everything, but he's becoming the man you raised." I smiled through the tears that came uninvited but welcome. "And don't worry," I added. "I made sure our family won't fall apart again. Not while I'm here." As I stood up to leave, a breeze rustled the trees, and for just a moment I could have sworn I heard his voice in it, the soft, amused tone he always used when I proved him right. I laughed out loud, the sound mingling with the wind. When I returned home, the children were in the yard chasing bubbles. Ethan and Melissa sat on the porch steps, tired but peaceful. The golden light of late afternoon made everything look almost sacred. I sat down beside them, took a deep breath, and realized that somehow we had found our way back to each other. Not as the same people, but as truer ones. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked through the house one last time. The photos on the walls looked different now, not reminders of what we'd lost, but proof of what we'd survived. I stopped at the mantel where the replica watch ticked softly next to my husband's photo. I picked it up and turned it in my hand, feeling its gentle rhythm, steady, resilient like the heartbeat of time itself. I whispered to the empty room, "You were right, love. Lies do burn a house down, but from the ashes, something better can grow." And then I smiled, because in the quiet hum of that moment, I finally understood something that had taken a lifetime to learn. Family isn't about who owes who. It's about who still shows up when everything else is gone. So to those listening tonight, remember this. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who teach you what love truly costs. And if you ever find yourself called a burden, don't break under the weight. Stand taller. Because what feels like a burden to others might just be the backbone of everything they stand on. Now turn off the lights, take a deep breath, and let this story settle in your chest. Maybe call someone you love tomorrow while there's still time to make things right. Thank you for listening, for being part of my story, and for staying until the end. You have no idea how much it means. To my subscribers, to the ones who've walked through storms of their own, I see you, I hear you, and I hope my words remind you that you're never truly alone. Good night, dear friends, and if you ever forget your worth, just remember, even ashes can glow. Before we say goodnight, I want to leave you with something real, something that lives beyond this story. People often talk about family as though it's unbreakable, like blood is armor and love is enough. But the truth, family isn't made of promises or last names. It's made of choices. Every day we choose whether to love honestly or pretend politely, whether to forgive or keep score, whether to face the truth or hide behind comfort. My son once called me a burden, and for a long time I believed him. I thought my worth had expired somewhere between his success and my silence. But now I know better. I wasn't his weight. I was his anchor. And anchors only feel heavy to those who are trying to drift away. If you're listening to this tonight and you've ever been made to feel like you're too much, I want you to remember you're not too much. You're just around people who offer too little. Sometimes the greatest act of love is learning when to let go, and the bravest act of forgiveness is saving yourself first. So wherever you are, in your kitchen, your car, lying awake in the dark, take a breath. You survived the storm, even if you're still shaking from the thunder. Thank you for being here, for walking through this with me, for holding space where pain could finally breathe. If my story reminded you of your own, don't keep it locked inside. Share it, speak it, heal out loud. Now turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for that soft hum of comfort and rest easy, knowing you are not a burden. You are the lesson someone else still needs to learn. Good night, and thank you for staying till the very end.